The trunk was packed, 3 sleek black suitcases, color-coded travel wallets, printed itineraries in clear folders. I had thought of everything. 7 days across Europe, a luxury tour I saved up for a year to plan, Paris, Florence, Lucerne, a dream vacation. Not for me, really, for them, my parents. It was my way of saying thank you for everything I thought they'd given me, and everything I was still hoping to receive. I rang the bell at exactly 6 a.m., smiling as I imagined their surprised faces. But when the door opened, my mother looked relieved, not excited, and then she said it. "We're not going with you." Behind her, standing smug in yoga pants and no luggage, was my younger sister, Emily. Mom continued, as if this was a group chat I had somehow missed. "Emily's been really stressed lately. We thought it might do her good. You know, a break. Besides, she's never been." I stood there, keys in hand, staring at 3 plane tickets, 2 of which no longer meant what I thought they did. I didn't argue, didn't beg, didn't even blink. "Sure," I said quietly. She needed the break, but what they didn't know was that they were about to get one too, just not the kind they were expecting. Has your generosity ever been handed off to someone else without even a second thought? Stick around. I grew up in a house where love was rationed, but expectations were endless. I was the oldest, responsible, quiet, dependable. Emily, my younger sister, was chaos wrapped in charm. Late for everything, flaky, a free spirit. My mom liked to say what that meant in real life. She'd get failing grades and my dad would laugh it off with, "She's just creative." I'd bring home an A- and be told, "You're slipping." It never changed. I moved out at 19 with 2 part-time jobs and a scholarship. Emily stayed home, dropped out of college twice, tried 5 different passion projects. Mom and Dad funded each one. Yoga teacher, failed. Handmade jewelry business, folded. Podcasting, lasted 3 weeks. Currently, soul realignment coaching, whatever that meant. Meanwhile, I worked. I built my career in financial planning from the ground up. I don't say that with arrogance. It came with long nights, imposter syndrome, and quietly crying in my car between client meetings. But it also came with stability, and that's what allowed me, after years of saving, to plan something I'd dreamed of since college, a trip to Europe with my parents. They hadn't traveled since their honeymoon. My dad had always wanted to see Florence. My mom, obsessed with classical music, had begged to attend a live opera in Paris for decades. This trip wasn't a vacation. It was a love letter, a thank you, a final chance, maybe, to create something beautiful before they got too old or the moments passed us by. I handpicked every detail. First-class flights, luxury hotel stays with accessible amenities for Dad's bad knees, private tours with a bilingual guide I found on a travel forum, and, of course, that opera night in Paris, seats in the 3rd row, her favorite composer. I even arranged for her name to be printed on the welcome program as a guest of honor. They didn't know that part. I wanted it to be a surprise, but I was the one surprised. Emily lived at home rent-free. She'd recently paused her coaching practice because, and I quote, "The universe told me to rest." She slept until noon most days, and yet still managed to be the gravitational center of every family gathering. Her moods dictated the room, her opinions steered the dinner table, and her needs, somehow, always outweighed mine. Still, I thought maybe this trip would rebalance things. Maybe time alone with Mom and Dad, away from the chaos, would finally allow me to connect with them as an adult, as someone worth seeing. But instead, they chose her again. And this time, they didn't even have the decency to warn me. Mom said, "She's been feeling down," Dad added. She could really use the exposure to culture, as if I were the tour guide in someone else's life. That morning, after they shut the door and rolled their luggage down the driveway, I sat in my car for 10 minutes, engine off, completely still, not crying, not raging, just stunned. I had poured thousands of dollars, hours of planning, and emotional hope into this trip. And in one sentence, we thought Emily needed it more. They erased me. I didn't cancel the tickets. I didn't yell or make a scene. But as I sat there, fingers resting on my steering wheel, one thought bloomed quietly. They don't get to enjoy the gift while discarding the giver. So I took a breath, opened my laptop, and started making some changes. They thought I'd stay behind and sulk. What they didn't know was that the real itinerary was just beginning, and I was about to become the guide of a journey none of them would forget. That evening, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the travel dashboard on my laptop. Flight check-ins completed by someone else. Hotel confirmations, all updated guest name, Emily. My entire itinerary reassigned. At first, I thought it was a fluke, some technical error, but when I logged into the app, I saw it clearly. Emily had used my login. She must have guessed the password, probably something obvious like my pet's name, and changed all the details. She took my seat on the flight, took my hotel room, took the private dinner reservation with the Eiffel Tower view I had booked 3 months in advance. She even sent herself the Paris Opera confirmation with my name on the ticket. I should have felt rage, but all I felt was clarity. This wasn't just entitlement. It was a pattern, and I'd let it go on for too long. I could have canceled everything, but instead, I did something better. I rewrote the rules. The first step, reclaim my itinerary. I called the concierge service that handled the Paris hotel. A sweet man named Luis answered. And after verifying my ID, I calmly explained. The guest who checked in using my information did so fraudulently. I'm the paying party, and I'm requesting to transfer the entire stay under a new name, mine. Louis paused, then said, Madame, do you wish to remove the current guest entirely? I smiled. Not yet. Let's just make her uncomfortable. Over the next 2 hours, I changed the hotel room from a suite to a standard double, canceled the complimentary wine and fruit welcome package, removed Emily's name from all restaurant reservations, moved the tour times, every single one of them, to overlap and conflict, and most deliciously, rerouted the opera tickets. Instead of delivering them to the hotel front desk, I had them sent to my Airbnb on the other side of the city. Because yes, I booked a new place, a gorgeous flat in Le Marais, not luxurious, but cozy, quiet, and mine. Then came the Florence leg of the trip. My dad had always dreamed of seeing the David. I had booked a private early access tour at the Galleria dell'Accademia before the crowds, just for us. Now it would still happen, but with me, not them. I sent a note to the guide. Please remove Mr. Yer and Mrs. Yuma Langford from the list. This is now a solo reservation. He confirmed with a polite, of course. One less thing to explain. Day by day, they began to notice. The hotel downgraded. The driver forgot their pickup. The tour guide canceled last minute. The restaurant claimed the booking was for next week. The spa package mysteriously vanished. Emily sent me a text. Did you do something? Everything's getting messed up. I didn't reply, because by then, I was in Lucerne, riding a boat across the lake, alone. Yes, but for the first time in years. Not invisible, but the final blow, it came in Paris, the night of the opera. I had the tickets delivered to me. Row 3, center aisle. I wore a simple black dress, red lipstick, and a silk scarf. Mom once said made me look too bold. I sat there, watching the chandelier rise, the orchestra hum, and just as the lights dimmed, I glanced to the side. Emily, standing in the aisle, wide-eyed, mouth slightly open. No ticket, no sit. She spotted me, and for a moment, her face flickered between fury and something like confusion, as if she'd just realized. I didn't lose the game. I changed the board. She stormed out. I stayed. I watched the entire performance with my hands folded in my lap. heart steady. A small, satisfied ache blooming in my chest, not from regret, but from release. They didn't deserve this trip, but I did, and no one could take that back now. They thought I'd disappear, that I'd fund their fantasy and fade away, but they underestimated what happens when the forgotten daughter finally puts herself first. The next morning, the messages began. Emily first. Wow, real mature. Hope you enjoyed your little revenge. Then Dad, I don't know what's gotten into you. We're stranded in Florence now. By the way, the guide says we're not on the list anymore. And finally, Mom, this is not how family behaves. I don't even recognize you. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then put my phone down. I didn't owe them a reaction. They weren't stranded. They were just uninvited. I spent that day walking through cobblestone alleys in Florence, letting the hum of a city older than their disappointment wash over me. No schedule, no luggage to carry but my own, no one to explain myself to. For once, I was on my own itinerary, emotionally and physically. But I knew it wasn't over, because people like my family, they don't reflect, they retaliate. That night, I checked my email. There it was. A request for expense reimbursement. An actual PDF, drafted by Emily, who, mind you, was unemployed and had never written anything more formal than an Instagram captions. She claimed I had misled the family, that I had invited them under false pretenses, and therefore they had to pay for alternate accommodations and new bookings out of pocket. Total claim, Ford. 8 on 60, 42. It would have been funny if it weren't so predictable. The audacity didn't even sting anymore. It felt tired, recycled. I poured a glass of wine, took a screenshot, and sent it straight to Claire, my financial advisor and longtime friend back in New York. Her reply, "Girl, let me handle this." The next day, while they were still sulking in overpriced hostels and missed reservations, I was eating pistachio gelato on a balcony in Rome. Claire had drafted the perfect response, a cease and desist warning for harassment, and a full list of documented financial gifts I'd provided over the last 5 years. Every dollar for Mom's root canal, every emergency loan Emily forgot to pay back, even the $200 I gave Dad to fix the garage door, which he actually used for golf equipment. We attached bank statements, Venmo receipts, screenshots of thank you texts from each of them. There was no case, just entitlement dressed in desperation. We hit send, and I felt lighter than I had in years. Then came the final twist, the one they never saw coming. While in Rome, I visited the U.S. embassy. It wasn't dramatic. No courtroom, no cameras. Just a quiet meeting with a consular officer, where I submitted a simple but important request to remove both my parents and sister from my travel proxy authorization. See, I'd listed them years ago as emergency contacts on every international document, bank form, and even some legal insurance paperwork. They could have, if something happened, made choices about my health, finances, even my remains. That ended now. I updated everything. Emergency contact. Aunt Maya, my mother's estranged sister, who'd quietly supported me over the years from the sidelines. She wasn't flashy, but she'd shown up at my graduation, at my first apartment, and the night my dog died. I sent her a postcard from Rome. Next time, we go together. No drama, just pasta and wine. She replied with a heart. The final stop on my trip was Lucerne, a quiet lake town with snowy peaks and still water. One night, I sat by the window and opened my journal. I wrote, "They brought Emily to Europe, but they didn't bring me to the edge." I walked away. On my last day, I got one more message, this time from Mom. Just 2 lines. "We're back. If you still care, you'd at least ask how the trip went." I didn't reply, because I already knew how it went. They went expecting a luxury gift. They left with confusion, delays, and no compass. They thought the trip was the reward, but really, it was the test. And they failed. They tried to shame me for taking back what was mine. But they forgot. Guilt only works on those still asking for permission. By the time I landed back in New York, I already knew what I had to do. The trip hadn't just exposed their betrayal, it clarified something deeper. I had spent my entire adult life subsidizing their comfort in the hope they'd someday respect me. It was time to end that investment. Permanently. The first thing I did was sit down with Claire, my advisor and quiet strategist. We went through every shared financial tie I still had with my family. It was more than I expected. I was co-signer on a personal loan Emily never paid off. My name was still listed as backup on my parents' health insurance coverage. I was the emergency contact on their life insurance policy, the one I paid into. And somehow, I was still covering their Spotify family plan. Claire looked at me and said plainly, "We need to treat this like a divorce, not emotional, legal." And so we did. We started with the bank. I removed myself from every joint account, revoked access to the travel card they had occasionally borrowed for years, requested name removal from any loan tied to their address. Then we tackled the credit. I froze my credit report to prevent any unauthorized applications under my name, a trick Emily had pulled once before, claiming she just needed a card to book a retreat. Not again. Then came the will. Not theirs. Mine. I updated my beneficiaries, removed every blood relative. Instead, I added two things: a women's legal fund that supports survivors of financial abuse, and Ava, my former assistant, now friend, who once offered to pick me up from surgery when Emily ghosted me because she was having a hard day. When I told Ava, she cried, not because of the money, because I told her, "You were the one person who didn't need me to prove I was worth your time." Then came the final play. I didn't scream, didn't post about it, didn't even write a dramatic Dear Family email. I simply sent a certified letter. Inside, a notarized statement revoking them as financial dependents, a summary of assets they were no longer authorized to touch, and a closing line that said, "This trip taught me more than 1,000 conversations ever could. I've learned that love without boundaries is self-erasure. This is not revenge. It's recovery. No signature, no phone number, just a return address P.O. box, and silence." A week later, Rachel, my mother's friend, called me privately. She said, "Your mom is telling everyone you turned on the family, that you humiliated them in Europe." I sighed. Let her say what she needs to say. I'm done defending the truth to people who've never lived it. Rachel paused, then added softly, "I always admired how much you gave. I just didn't realize how much they took." And that was the quiet justice. They tried to paint me as cold, but I wasn't cold. I was clear. They tried to guilt me into apologizing, but I wasn't guilty. I was done. And the final twist? That same month, I got an invitation to speak at a women's finance conference. One of the organizers had followed my travel blog, seen my updates about reclaiming my life, and asked me to speak on the topic, Generosity with Boundaries, How to Say No Without Losing Yourself. I stood in front of 300 women, some laughing, some crying, many nodding like they'd lived a version of my story too. And I said, "Family doesn't get to cash in on loyalty they've never deposited." Applause. Real, earned, empowering. Not because I tore anyone down, but because I stood up for myself. They tried to write me out of my own story, but I took the pen back. And the ending? It's the best part. Peace doesn't always arrive like a revelation. Sometimes it creeps in quietly, in the silence that follows when the people who once demanded your time no longer have access to it. That's what I felt 2 months after the trip. As I sipped my morning coffee with no unread messages from my family, no financial requests, no backhanded guilt trips disguised as check-ins, just stillness and ownership of my time, my energy, my story. I had always believed that keeping the family together meant swallowing my hurt, minimizing my needs, and giving. But what they never taught me, what I had to learn the hard way, is that a family who only loves you when you're useful isn't family. It's an audience, and I had finally left the stage. I spent the following weeks building a life with different priorities. More painting, less planning. More walks in the park. Fewer trips booked for people who'd leave me on the curb. I hosted small dinners with chosen friends, the kind who remembered my coffee order, not just the favors I'd done for them. And I finally booked another trip to Europe. Same cities, different purpose. This time, it was with Ava and her partner. 3 women, no drama, just joy. We stood under the Eiffel Tower one night, wrapped in scarves, laughing about something silly, and Ava turned to me and asked, "Do you regret not confronting them harder, not making them apologize?" I shook my head. No, because I didn't need an apology. I needed to reclaim my value, and that doesn't come from someone else admitting they were wrong. It comes from me no longer needing them to. A week after I got home, I received a postcard, no return name, just a beach photo, and on the back, a line in my mother's handwriting, "You've made your point. We hope someday you'll remember we're still your family." I stared at it, read it twice, then tucked it away in a drawer, not out of anger, but because I've learned being blood doesn't make you permanent. Being present does. I didn't respond, but I did write something else that night in the journal I started on that trip, the one titled Things I Used to Believe, and under that heading, I wrote, that being chosen meant being loved. That being quiet meant being safe. That being useful meant I had value. That if I gave enough, I'd eventually be enough. Then I scratched through every single one. If you're watching this and thinking, this sounds like my sister, my mom, my family, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not selfish for walking away. You are not cold for saying enough. You are not cruel for demanding reciprocity. What's cruel is the expectation that your love must always be silent, sacrificial, and never returned. You are not a villain for having boundaries. You are the hero for surviving without applause. And if that's you, I see you, and I hope this story reminds you, sometimes the gift isn't the trip, or the ticket, or the table reservation. Sometimes the gift is finally realizing you deserve more than scraps from people who feast without you. Has your generosity ever been hijacked? Has your love been redirected to someone who needed it more while you were left in the shadows? Drop it in the comments if you've ever planned something for someone and they made you feel like the extra, or drop a if you've started building something new, something better, with yourself at the center. And hey, if you're ready to hear more stories where quiet women rise, underestimated daughters win, and emotional justice is served with calm strategy, subscribe. Because here, we don't just tell stories, we take back the narrative. Final line, they thought I booked them a vacation, but what I really gave them was a lesson, and what I gave myself, a life without them, on time, on purpose, and finally, on my terms.